Welcome back. Welcome to week 2 of Skeptic, folks. Now, I'm a little bit concerned we've got a gym full of people here, something like 32 tables, and the only table I see that's empty is the one right in front of me. Now, I warned them last week they might be in the spit zone, and apparently that happened, perhaps. I'm not sure. But if they come in late and you see them, don't boo them, don't hiss them, welcome them, okay? Well, welcome to you as well. Thanks for coming back for week 2. I am really looking forward to what we're going to be talking about for the next few moments. Now, parents sat down with their 8-year-old child and they said, "Son, we need to have a talk. We need to tell you about the birds and the bees." And the little boy stood up. He said, "No, wait, sorry, this is not going to happen. First, you sat me down a while ago," he said, "and you said, 'Son, we need to have a talk about Santa Claus.' And you told me there is no Santa Claus. And if you have any children here, that's between you and your children. And then he said, and then you sat down with me and said, 'We need to have a talk about the tooth fairy.' And you told me, 'Son, there is no tooth fairy.' And then you sat me down, you said, 'We need to have a talk about the Easter bunny.' And you said, 'Son, there is no Easter bunny.' And now you're telling me that you have to talk about the birds and the bees? If you tell me the birds and the bees don't exist, I can't handle that." Well, this course is designed for skeptics and friends of skeptics. And it's designed to address some nagging questions around the issues of God and faith. So let's quickly remind ourselves of the terrain that we've traveled so far. Last week, we talked about evidence for the existence of God. And we learned 4 key things. We learned that God is the best explanation for the existence of the universe. We learned that God is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe. We learned that God is the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and duties. And we learned that God is the best explanation for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's that last one I promised you that we would elaborate on a bit. So tonight we're going to complete that final point from last week's presentation. That God is the best explanation for the events surrounding the resurrection of Jesus. Now, so far the evidence that we presented argues for the existence of a morally good, incredibly powerful, unfathomably intelligent creator of the universe who exists eternally outside of space and time. Now, this describes the God of all 3 of the world's monotheistic religions, the God of Christianity, the God of Judaism, and the God of Islam. But tonight's teaching takes an important turning point because tonight's teaching will eliminate 2 of those options, leaving us with only one remaining option. So what's the evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ? Can a rational, grounded, facts-based individual be a proponent of what we'll call the resurrection hypothesis? So let's look at the historical facts as modern scholarship knows them. Now, although I fully believe the Bible, which is often referred to as God's Word, I fully believe the Bible to be God's Word to us and inspired and inerrant. For the sake of our presentation this evening, I am not treating the New Testament as a set of inspired holy scriptures. I'm not going to do that. What I mean is, I'm not going to give the New Testament any special treatment this evening. Instead, this evening, I am treating the New Testament documents as modern scholars and historians treat them. As simple, ancient documents that have been handed down and need to be tested, verified, and scrutinized. Now, we need to realize something. Maybe for some of you, this may be new. When we talk about the Bible, let's just focus on the New Testament for tonight. When we talk about the New Testament half of the Bible, it's not one book per se. Even the Bible itself is not one book. The Bible is a whole bunch of different books and letters and manuscripts compiled together in one volume. So it's like, it's 66 different books with many different authors, and their works have all been combined into one volume called the Bible, broken up into the Old Testament or the Old Contract and the New Testament or the New Contract. Okay? Now, many who are unfamiliar with the state of New Testament scholarship have the mistaken impression that the textual reliability of the New Testament documents is somehow suspect. I've heard it many times over the years. Oh, the Bible, it's a dusty old book that's been translated so many times that we've lost the meaning. We don't even know what it originally said. It's been translated so many times. In fact, people will often say, Darin, it's like the old game of telephone. You ever played the game of telephone? Where, you line people up on the stage, and the person at this end, you whisper something into their ear, and then they have to immediately whisper it into the next person's ear, and the next person, and as you go down the line, what ends up at the end of it all is completely different than what they said at the beginning. And they say, that's like the Bible. This thing's been translated so many times over the centuries, who knows what the original authors said? Well, in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. And let me illustrate that fact with a comparison that I've provided for you on your outlines tonight. Now, on your outlines, we've got essentially these headings, I believe. You've got writings. I think I called it writings. I don't remember. Writings are the books. And then we've got the original. So when was the original document written? Then we've got the earliest copy. When was the earliest copy? Then we've got the gap. We'll see what that means in a moment. And then we've got number of copies. Those are our headings. And this is a fascinating comparison. Simon said, what a good drawer I am. Look at this. This is without rulers. That's incredible. Well done, Darin. Okay. Now, when history professors quote from the writings of Aristotle, let's say, okay? So that we've got that first one, Aristotle. When history writers quote from the writings of Aristotle, they don't doubt that Aristotle actually wrote the words that they're teaching and reading. And for good reason. Now, do we have the original documents that Aristotle wrote? No, of course not. He wrote, thousands of years ago, and so well, over 1,000 years ago, in fact, over a couple thousand years ago, as we'll learn in a moment. So we don't have the original, what the historiographers call the autograph. We don't have the original document that Aristotle wrote. Of course not. It was written hundreds and many centuries ago, and on papyrus probably. It's decayed, it's decomposed by now. It's gone. Okay, so we don't have the original. So. But when did he actually write the original is the question we want to know. And he wrote the original somewhere between 384 and 322 BC. Okay, that's your blank there. He wrote the original somewhere between 384 and 322 BC. Okay? So, of course we don't have the original. We only have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. Okay? But the earliest, the original was written then. The earliest copy we have is dated 1100 AD. Okay? So do we have the original written, between 384 and 322 BC? No, lost. We have copies of copies of copies. But the earliest copy we have is 1100 AD, okay? Which is a gap of 1,400 years. So there's 1,400 years between the original one, which is lost, and the earliest copy that we have, okay? A gap of 1,400 years. However, why historians feel pretty secure that when you read Aristotle's writing, you're reading what he wrote, is because we have 49 copies. Now, 49, that's a good number, because and by the way, the bigger this number is, the better. Why? Because the more copies you have, the more you can compare the other copies to see which ones are saying the same thing. For example, let's imagine that everyone left this room and you all left your Skeptic booklets behind, okay? And next week, different people come in, and they want to know, what did Darin teach last week because the recordings didn't work? So what did he teach? Well, we could look at the copies of the manuscripts that you leave behind. Now, some of you aren't paying attention because you're on your phones and you're not writing down the right words. Some of you are writing the right words, but maybe with the wrong spelling. And some of you are copying exactly what I've written down because you're incredibly intelligent. Either way, what they could do is they could gather in, they could look at all of your copies, and they could compare, and they could say, of the few 200 people, whatever, here, 180 of them all had Aristotle and these numbers, and a couple had some different things. So the more copies you have, the better it is because you can compare, okay? So 49 copies, a gap of 1,400 years. Historians look at that and say, you know something? We feel pretty solid that when you read Aristotle, you're reading a good representation of his words, even though we don't have the original, of course. Perhaps the most widely attested non-religious ancient document would be the Iliad by Homer. Not Homer Simpson, but Homer, the famous author, okay? When was this was written? It was written in 900 BC. Do we have the original? Of course not. We don't have the original. But it was written in 900 BC. Now, the earliest copy we have is from 400 BC, which is a gap of 500 years. Okay? Original, written in 900. Don't have it, lost. The earliest copy we have is from 400 BC, so that's a gap of 500 years. Okay? Which is much better than Aristotle when it comes to Homer. That's why the Iliad is this is the gold standard here when it comes to ancient non-religious documents. And what's even better, what makes us so certain, is that we have 643 copies. Wow. I mean, that's incredible, to have 643 copies. So we are well certain that the Iliad that we have today is very close, if not identical, to the Iliad written nearly 3,000 years ago. Scholars consider this combination of only 500 years and 643 copies to be historical bedrock. So how do the New Testament documents stand up? How does the New Testament stand up against other accepted ancient documents? Here's the most recent scholarship I could find, and these dates were from March of 2018 is the most updated information I have here. And this is the most conservative that I could be, so I'm not making this as best as possible. The New Testament documents were written somewhere between 45 and 95 AD. Okay? 45 and 95 AD. The earliest copies we have were written between 125 and 200 AD. By the way, do we have the originals that Paul and the original Gospels? No, we don't. Of course not. They're a couple thousand years old. They're disintegrated. But the earliest copies that we have were written 125 to 200 AD, which is, we'll say, about a 150-year gap. Not 1,400, not 500, 150. Okay? Now, how many copies do we have? Well, when it comes to the New Testament manuscripts, we have, and I'll explain this number in a moment, between 5,000, 5,900 and 24,000 copies. You say, how can you have such a huge gap? I'll explain that in a second. Between 5,900 and 24,000 copies. The difference is, it depends on the language you're talking about. If we're talking about ancient Greek manuscripts, which is what the New Testament was written in originally, we have 5,856 to be specific. The last 5,856 to be specific copies in ancient Greek. And in other languages like Coptic, Syrian, Latin, and Aramaic, we have 24,000. Of those that have been found over the centuries. Folks, the simple truth is that the New Testament is the best attested document in ancient history, both in terms of the number of manuscripts and the nearness of the copies to the original. In fact, modern reconstructions of the New Testament text have been done, and it has now been firmly established by scholars and historians that, and here's the number, the official number, 99.8% of the New Testament that you have today is what was originally written 2,000 years ago. We have an accuracy today of 99.8% to the original documents. Think in these terms. There are 138,000 words, 138,000 Greek words in the New Testament. When you add up every word in the Greek New Testament, 138,000 words. And of those 138,000 words, scholars are absolutely certain of 136,600 of them. Absolute no doubt about 136,600 of them. There are only 1,400 words that are uncertain. And those 1,400 words are minor issues such as, did Paul write that your joy may be full, or did he write that our joy may be full? We're not sure. But it doesn't matter. It affects no doctrine or no historical importance whatsoever in those 1,400 words. Sir Frederick Kenyon, once the director and principal librarian of the British Museum, wrote this, I quote, "Any doubts that the scriptures have come down to us substantially as they were written has now been removed. Both the authenticity and the general integrity of the books of the New Testament may be regarded as finally and firmly established." Dr. Anthony Flew, remember we met him last week. He was a one-time atheist who late in his life became a theist because of the evidence for fine-tuning. He said this in a debate that I watched and that I have the book, and I met the gentleman. In fact, the gentleman that Anthony Flew was debating spoke here at Broadway a few years ago, Gary Habermas. And in this debate, Anthony Flew, who was an atheist at the time, stated this. He said, "The textual authority, the earliness and number of manuscripts for most of the Christian documents is unusually great." He was an atheist when he said that. So, despite the uninformed ranting of the odd internet infidel blogger, when we deal with the claims around the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we're not playing a game of telephone where rumors have grown over the centuries. We are dealing with the claims that can be traced literally to first century contemporaries and even eyewitnesses. Now, historians reached consensus long ago regarding the existence of Jesus. The 19th and early 20th century proposition that the man named Jesus of Nazareth was simply a legend was long ago put out to pasture by modern scholarship and archaeology. I remember back in it was late 1980s, I think. I'm from Ontario originally. And I was in Toronto where I was living and pastoring. And I was at the Royal Ontario Museum because the Dead Sea Scrolls were on exhibit, or a portion of them as I remember. And so we were there viewing, these Dead Sea Scrolls at the Royal Ontario Museum. And there was a room of, I'll say, 300-400 of us there, and in this theater type room. And there was an archaeologist, a Jewish gentleman, who was speaking. He was traveling with the exhibit. And they had other exhibits, the stone that had Pontius Pilate from the Bible, his name engraved on it that they had found and so on. Fascinating stuff. And I'll never forget, a lady up to my left, she went to a microphone, Q&A time, like we have here. And she said, "Yes, doctor, I'm wondering, why do you keep referring to this Jesus as though he actually existed? There's no evidence that he ever existed." And this Jewish archaeologist from Israel said, "Oh, ma'am, you're mistaken. We have excellent corroborating historical evidence that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, existed. You cannot deny or doubt the existence of Jesus and be a historian or archaeologist." Dr. Edwin Yamauchi of Miami University, a leading expert in ancient history, stated the following, I quote, "We have better historical documentation for Jesus than for the founder of any other ancient religion." So, if someone tells you that we don't even know if Jesus of Nazareth ever existed, they are entirely uninformed and actually ignorant of modern scholarship. Now, I've discovered that while many people understand that the existence of Jesus is a historical fact, they mistakenly think that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just have to believe by a leap of faith. That is not true. The resurrection of Jesus is equally a matter of dealing with historical evidence. Now, when it comes to the historical record, there are essentially 4 established facts recognized by the vast majority of New Testament scholars, critics, and historians today, which I would put to you are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Now remember, as we're about to look at them quickly, these 4 facts I'm about to present are not in dispute among the vast majority of modern scholars and critics, meaning agnostic, atheist, theistic critics. These 4 facts are not debated. These 4 facts are agreed upon, even by those who would deny or doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. So tonight, I want us to think of ourselves as a few hundred detectives. And these 4 facts are 4 concrete clues that we have to work with, okay? As Simon said earlier, I presented this material in churches and colleges and universities across Canada and various parts of the world. In fact, as I was looking over these notes, the last time I presented it was at Skeptic a year ago, and before that, the last time I had presented it was actually to a group of 70 people in Jerusalem, sitting on benches 20 feet from the Garden Tomb. Here's historical fact number 1 on your outline. After his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. So after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. This is an undisputed fact of history. Joseph of Arimathea was a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin, an ancient Jewish law court. It was the court that sentenced Jesus to death, though they didn't have the authority to kill him, so they then had to convince the Romans to have him crucified. Now, the ancient documents declare that after Jesus' death, his body was wrapped and then buried in the tomb that was donated by this man named Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin. Now, historians find this fact to be highly credible due to what they refer to as the embarrassment factor. Now, by that they mean that it is highly unlikely that this is a later legendary embellishment, since you have one of the enemies of the early church, a member of the judicial body that had Jesus killed, acting in a heroic manner. Early Christians inventing the story of Joseph of Arimathea burying Jesus would be akin to modern Israelites inventing a story that Hitler secretly rescued Jewish children from concentration camps. It wouldn't happen. And for this, among other reasons, historians agree, after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Historical fact number 2. On the Sunday following his death, the tomb of Jesus was found to be empty by his women followers. On the Sunday following his death, the tomb of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, which Christ means Messiah, was found to be empty by his women followers. Get this, folks. The empty tomb is a fact of history. Realize this. Historians will debate how the tomb became empty, but they do not debate whether or not the tomb was empty. The fact that the tomb was found empty by a group of women serves as another powerful sign of authenticity to ancient historians, again, due to the embarrassment factor. Now you say, Darin, what's so embarrassing about a bunch of women finding the tomb empty? Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just going to tell you the truth here. As distasteful as it is to our modern sensibilities, the testimony of women was not acceptable in ancient Jewish courts. The only time a woman could testify is if a man was not present as a witness. Women were simply not trusted as reliable witnesses. So an invented account of the circumstances surrounding the empty tomb would certainly not have the first eyewitnesses be women. An invented account that they made up would have Peter or John or some other group of powerfully important men as the first eyewitnesses. The fact that the manuscripts record that it was women who first witnessed the empty tomb is a strong sign of unvarnished, honest testimony. Historical fact number 3. On separate, multiple occasions, different individuals and groups of individuals, including 500 people at one time, saw what they claimed to be appearances of Jesus alive after his death. On separate, multiple occasions, not just once, not just by one person, separate, multiple occasions, different individuals and groups of individuals, including 500 people at one time, saw what they claimed to be appearances of Jesus alive after his death. These appearances were witnessed not just by believers, but by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies of Jesus. Now, this is an important fact because any appeal to hallucinations or wish fulfillment, as we'll talk about later, simply does not fit the historical facts. As one example, the undeniable facts behind the story of the man known as Saul of Tarsus, who we now know as the Apostle Paul, is a crucial piece of history that has to be addressed by every skeptic. Saul was a Jewish religious scholar and, by his own account, a zealot who was an enemy of the early Christ followers. In fact, Saul terrorized the early church. He hunted down and he killed the first Christians. That was his job. And while he was on one of his seek and destroy missions, Saul claimed to have had an encounter with the resurrected Jesus. And this encounter instantly changed the direction of Saul's life. In literally an instant, Saul turned from being a killer of Christians to being a follower of Christ in an instant. This would be akin to Osama bin Laden being the leader of Al-Qaeda at 11 a.m. and being a member of President Bush's cabinet at 11:01 a.m. Historians marvel. What could cause such a radical, powerful, instant turnaround? Saul claimed that he met the resurrected Christ, and he would later die because of his claim. So scholars are in agreement that the historical record reports multiple early and independent eyewitness accounts. And these multiple early independent testimonies, even eyewitness testimony from enemies and combatants, must be accounted for. Historical fact number 4. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having no expectation of it. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having no expectation of it. As one scholar put it, you need a sufficient launching pad to explain the launch of this missile known as Christianity. And it can't be this gradual ramp of legend being built up over decades or generations. It was an instant liftoff. Men and women who were one day hiding and cowering and denying they even knew Christ were the next day willing to die for the claim that he had risen from the dead. Something happened, literally in an instant, that must be explained. Now, it's important to understand that the original disciples had absolutely no expectation of a dying and rising Messiah. The Messiah dying was like Superman dying. It was unthinkable. A dying Messiah was an oxymoron. Add to that the fact that according to Jewish law, how Jesus died, by being hung on a cross, crucified, was evidence that he was under God's curse, not that he was God's Messiah. Plus, add to that the fact that the Jewish beliefs of the afterlife did not anticipate anyone being resurrected until the very end of the world. And you come to the realization that the resurrection of Jesus was a completely unanticipated event. We look back and say, yeah, the Messiah dies and rises again. No, that was not the thinking at all 2,000 years ago. Messiah didn't die. Messiah was a conquering king. He would come and kick out all the Romans and all of the enemies, and he would reign forever. He doesn't die. And the resurrection happens at the very end of the world, not before anyone else. As scholar Dr. N.T. Wright put it, in the first century, when your Messiah died, you either went home or you got yourself a new Messiah. Now, if we want to be rational, we need to deal with the facts. When you're rational, facts are your friends. So what are the facts of this case? Here's what we know. Here's what is not disputed. Historical fact 1, after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Historical fact number 2, on the Sunday following his death, the tomb of Jesus was found to be empty by his women followers. Historical fact number 3, on separate multiple occasions, different individuals and even groups of individuals, including 500 people at one time, claimed to see appearances of Jesus alive after his death. And historical fact number 4, the original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having no expectation of it. Now, as honest detectives, as men and women who are willing to follow wherever the evidence leads, our explanation needs to account for all four of these historical facts. But here's the thing. Every naturalistic attempt, meaning non-supernatural, every naturalistic attempt over the last 2,000 years to explain these four facts has been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. Understand this. And this is an area I've devoted nearly 40 years of my life to studying. There is not one single naturalistic theory that is able to explain all of the known historical facts of the case. Not one. But don't take my word for it. Let me show you. So what are the competing theories to the eyewitness claims of Jesus' first followers? What rational alternatives has 2,000 years worth of skepticism produced? Here's the product of over 2,000 years worth of skepticism. Number one on your outline, the theft theory. The theft theory. And that is the theory that the disciples came and stole the body. This was the original attempt at an explanation from the Jewish authorities at the time. The theft theory. And this is what happened. The guards who were guarding the tomb, they were paid to say this: while we were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. So the body was placed in the tomb. And you need to understand how back in those days, you weren't buried in the ground, you were buried in caves. So carved out caves in the wall here of rock. And so they'd carve out a cave, and then they have giant stones. They'd dig a hole in front of the doorway, and then they'd roll this giant stone, and it would fall in there. It would seal the cave. Okay? And they would wait about a year, and then that climate, in about a year or so, the body would decompose. Then they'd pull that rock back again. They'd go in, gather the bones, put them in an ossuary, and then the cave would be open for someone else to use in the future. That's how it worked. And this one, so they put the body in the cave. That wasn't denied. Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. It was a new one, hadn't been used yet. Roll the stone. They wrap him up, partially embalm him, put him in the cave, in the grave, stone there, and the tomb is guarded. And the first attempt at explaining this was, the guard said, while we were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. Now, what's the problem with this theory? Well, hold on. Do you mean the same guys who hid when Jesus was arrested, shrank from a woman's accusation around a campfire? Sorry, ladies, but seriously. And were too afraid to even claim Jesus' body? These guys suddenly conspired to steal the body and to make up a resurrection story? Seriously? I'm not sure that works. I need to find someone here that I don't know, so we don't. Have we ever talked, Raphael? Have we never had conversations, right? Okay, would you mind coming up for just a second? I won't embarrass you, I promise. Okay, stand right. You mind being on camera? You're not in the witness protection program or anything? Okay. So, your English is not good? Not a problem. I will speak slowly. So you are a Roman guard. You are a Roman guard soldier, okay? And you were guarding the tomb. Good. Well, man, good. He's into it. I picked the right guy. There you go. Okay. So you are a Roman guard, and I am a lawyer, and you are on trial. And your name is Antonio. Antonio. Okay. So, Antonio, you were on guard of Jesus' tomb the other night, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Antonio, now, if I understand your story correctly, you said that your testimony is while you were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, Antonio, could you please show the jury the position that your eyes are in while you are sleeping? Are your eyes open or closed, Antonio?
When I sleep?
When you sleep, yes. Closed. Okay, so could you close your eyes like you would where you were that evening? Keep yourself in the sleeping position, Antonio. Keep them closed. Thank you. Antonio, with your eyes closed in the sleeping position, how many fingers am I holding up right now? You don't know, Antonio?
No, I don't know.
You don't? Why not, Antonio? Why don't you know?
No.
You can't tell.
No.
Okay, try now.
No.
Okay, open. Antonio, but you said while you were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. How do you know the disciples came if you were sleeping? You can be seated. Thank you. Thank you very much. It doesn't take a great lawyer to debunk that story, right? How can sleeping guards identify people? And what about the resurrection appearances, including to the enemies of Jesus? Does an outright lie explain the disciples' lives from that day forward? Many of them died for what would be a known lie. And what did they gain? They didn't go on Oprah. They didn't get a book tour. They died. And some of their family members died because of a lie that they knew was a lie. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And the theft theory has not been proposed as a viable alternative for nearly 2,000 years. So then there's number 2. There's the no burial theory. The no burial theory. This was the theory that Jesus' body was thrown into a pit, not into the tomb. So the explanation was, back in those days, the Romans crucified a lot of people, and they did. They crucified thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. It was a regular occurrence there. It's how they kept the people scared. And what they would do is they wouldn't bury all the crucifixion people who had died, victims of crucifixion. They would actually dig a big pit, and they would toss the bodies into a pit. And so this argument goes like this. What happened is that they threw Jesus' body into a pit, but the women thought it was in a tomb. They went to a tomb, saw the tomb empty, and they went, woohoo, he's been risen from the dead. Now, what's the problem with this theory? Why wouldn't the Romans simply produce the real body? Oh, hey, stop, time out. You're telling people that Jesus is risen from the dead? No. Come with me. Mary, other ladies, come here. You went to a tomb. He wasn't in the tomb. Look, there's the body. See right there? And the women go, oh, yeah, sorry. And what about the resurrection appearances? Doesn't explain the resurrection appearances. This theory was never a serious consideration and has absolutely no modern-day support as a viable alternative. Number 3, the wrong tomb theory. This is the theory that the women accidentally went to the wrong tomb on Easter morning. You know, women and directions. Sorry, but this was the theory. So what happened was, they were originally there when Jesus was buried, and then when they went back Sunday, they went into the cemetery. Instead of turning right, they turned left. They saw a tomb that was empty. Woohoo, he's risen from the dead. But they went to the wrong tomb. He was buried in that one. What are the problems with this theory? Well, again, why wouldn't the Romans kindly point them to the correct tomb? Ladies, Mary, come on. Once again, look, roll the stone away. See, there he is. Oh, sorry. And what about the resurrection appearances? This theory never got any traction, has no modern-day support as a viable alternative. Number 4, the hallucination theory. The hallucination theory. This is the theory that the resurrection appearances were mere hallucinations. The disciples, the followers of Jesus, were so traumatized. They were so grief-stricken. They so wanted Jesus to be the Messiah that they actually hallucinated. They actually so wanted to believe this. It was wish fulfillment that they thought they saw him, but they didn't actually. What are the problems with this theory? Again, if that was the truth, why wouldn't the Romans produce the body and end all the hallucinating? No, he hasn't risen. Roll the stone away, Claudius. There we go. See, he's in the tomb. Oh, sorry. Our mistake. Our bad. And this theory does not fit the facts for Jesus' appearances to the disciples as individuals, as a group, or as a crowd of 500 people. Listen, I can have a hallucination. You can have a hallucination. You can have a hallucination. You can have a hallucination. But we can't network our hallucinations. And all the disciples had hallucinations at the same time. They touched him. 500 people at one time. They ate food with him. He served food to them. Plus, preconditioning is a major factor in hallucinations. And this theory doesn't fit the facts regarding the state of mind of the disciples. For example, James, Jesus' brother, who was not a follower of Christ when Jesus walked the earth. In fact, James said that his brother, he called Jesus crazy at one point, said he's lost his mind. Until Jesus appeared to him resurrected after Jesus' death. It doesn't explain Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. Saul wasn't wishing Jesus was alive. He was killing Jesus' followers. He was glad Jesus was dead at the time. It doesn't explain. He had no preconditioning, no wish fulfillment whatsoever. And besides, when one has a hallucination involving a deceased person, one doesn't take that hallucination as a sign that the person's alive, but as a confirmation that they're dead. This theory was proposed in the early 20th century. However, I am not aware of any modern evidence among New Testament historians or scholars to support it. In debates and so on, people will allude to the hallucination theory, and then when you say, so are you a proponent of that theory? Oh, no, I'm not, but it has to be considered. But you don't believe it? Oh, no. Because the truth is that this theory has the most problems with it of all the theories. And then there's number 5. The swoon theory. The swoon, S-W-O-O-N, not zero, S-W-O-O-N, swoon theory. This is that Jesus only fainted on the cross. He kind of like went into a coma, and he resuscitated in the cool tomb, and he escaped. Some of our Islamic friends have proposed this over the years. So the theory goes like this, is that Jesus is hanging on the cross, and then he slips into a coma, and he looks like he's dead. So what the Roman guards mistakenly do is they take him down, they take the nails out of his wrists and his feet, and they take him down from the tomb, they wrap him up and put spices and so on, part of the embalming process. Then Joseph of Arimathea has him laid in the tomb. Okay? And by the way, Pilate had Jesus' body checked to ensure that he was dead. When Pilate got word that Jesus had died already, he said, are you sure? And the soldiers got back to him, yep, he's dead. But they made a mistake twice. And then they take him, they put him in the tomb, they close, big boulder over the tomb, they guard it. But then, Jesus, in the coolness of the tomb, he somehow unwraps the gauze and all the cloth from around him, like a mummy. It's like a mummy. He unwraps it. He somehow gets up, and with his beaten back, remember he was whipped 39 times with lashes, called a cat of nine tails, where it's a leather strap with bits of bone embedded in the end of it. So when the Romans would lash against your body, it would grab hold the bones and tear flesh. Many people didn't even survive that, and it would expose inner organs, historians record. By the way, when you die on the cross, you would die of asphyxiation. You would suffocate, because it would take many hours, if not days sometimes. You'd be hanging there, and then you have to push yourself up on your nail-scarred feet and hands, and you push yourself up to breathe. And then you'd fall down like this, your weight would hold you down, and your lungs would be sort of collapsing, so you have to push yourself up to get a breath, and then you'd go down like this. It'd be exhausting, and you would die of exhaustion and asphyxiation, which is why when they wanted to speed up the process, they would break the people's legs so they couldn't push up anymore. And when they checked Jesus, they broke the legs of the other two because it was almost Sabbath and the Jews wanted these bodies down by Sabbath. They checked Jesus, he was already dead. They stuck a spear in his side, and out came blood and water together, a sign that his pericardium and aorta had been pierced. The medical community tells us he was dead. But he's wrapped up, and he actually wasn't dead, apparently, according to this theory. He's wrapped up, and inside that tomb, he unravels the gauze and the cloth. He gets up on his nail-scarred feet, and with his beaten, whipped back, and he, by himself, from inside the tomb, pushes the stone open, sneaks past the guard, naked. He then appears to the disciples in his beaten body, and he says, you too can have a body like this someday. And they all celebrated, and he was never to be seen again. Does that make sense to you? I'm not aware of any contemporary historians or New Testament scholars that subscribe to this theory. Folks, that's it. If you're a skeptic or an adherent of another religion, You have to choose from one of those theories or propose a different one at a microphone tonight. That's the menu for 2,000 years worth of skepticism. You say, Darin, there's got to be something better. Well, actually, there is one more. What's the state of the art when it comes to the alternative naturalistic theories of the resurrection? Dr. William Lane Craig, a noted Christian apologist and debater, I think the finest in the world, spoke here at Broadway a few years ago. He shared about a recent debate he had on this topic with a professor from the University of California, a professor who did his doctoral thesis on a skeptical response to the resurrection. This skeptic's response to the facts that was Jesus must have had a long... Let me put it this way. This is what the gentleman proposed. This is the state of the art. Here we go. Jesus must have had a long-lost twin brother. I'm serious. He had a long-lost twin brother, separated at birth, who just happened to be in the Jerusalem area when Jesus was crucified. And he appeared to people and impersonated Jesus for some reason. Why would you want to impersonate a man who had been hunted down and killed by the Romans? I'm not sure. But that's what he did. And then he disappeared, never to be seen again. I think we've officially scraped the bottom of the barrel now. Let me conclude. Can a rational person accept the resurrection of Jesus? I would respectfully put to you that if by rational you mean dealing with the facts and following where the evidence leads you, the only explanation that factors in all the known historical facts is the resurrection of Jesus. That's why it seems to me, as a follower of Jesus, that a follower of Christ is historically and intellectually justified in both believing and declaring that Jesus rose from the dead, proving that he was who he claimed to be, God come to earth in flesh. Professor Thomas Arnold, scholar, author of the famous 3-volume History of Rome, once appointed to the chair of modern history at Oxford University, a man well acquainted with the value of evidence in determining historical facts, wrote this concerning the historical evidence for the resurrection of Christ. I quote him. Thousands and thousands of persons have gone through it piece by piece, as carefully as every judge summing up on a most important cause. I have myself done it many times over, not to persuade others, but to satisfy myself. I've been used for many years to study the histories of other times and to examine and weigh the evidence of those who have written about them. And I know of no one fact in the history of mankind which is proved by better and fuller evidence of every sort to the understanding of a fair inquirer than the great sign which God has given us, that Christ died and Christ rose again from the dead. What is the most plausible response to the facts you've heard so far these 2 weeks? For the evidence for the existence of God? What's more plausible? And for the resurrection of Jesus? You don't have to be 100% certain. You only need 51% certainty to say it's more plausible of the resurrection than any of the others. What is most plausible in your mind? Discuss that around the table right now for a few moments, and then we'll open the microphones for questions.